There is a $2 grocery item that keeps a family fed for 6 full months without refrigeration, without canning equipment, and without a single visit to a store. Not a month, not 3 months, 6. White rice, the most documented emergency staple on Earth, stores safely in sealed containers for 25 to 30 years, according to published research from Brigham Young University. The United States Army has field-tested it. FEMA lists it by name in its official preparedness guidelines. Ancient civilizations across 4 separate continents built their entire food security systems around it. The rice storage industry, which includes the industrial food rotation and prepper product market, is now valued at over $14 billion annually, selling vacuum-sealed packaging, oxygen absorbers, and proprietary storage kits for items you can replicate at home for the cost of a bucket and a lid. And then something else happened. In 27 states across this country, ordinances, zoning codes, and municipal emergency management statutes have created legal gray zones and direct restrictions around residential food stockpiling. They do not call it a ban, they call it a storage limit. But the mechanism is identical. What cannot generate recurring revenue gets buried. This is the story of the $2 item that sustained civilizations, that the modern food storage industry systematically repackaged and sold back to you, and why knowing the original method is now, in certain jurisdictions, technically illegal. Welcome to Forbidden Camping. The year is roughly 2700 BC. The Yellow River Basin in ancient China stretches flat and golden under a late summer sun, and along its banks, workers are doing something that will quietly outlast every dynasty, every emperor, and every military campaign China will ever see. They are packing rice into fired clay vessels, sealing the mouths with packed earth and beeswax, and burying them below the frost line. Emperor Shennong, who Chinese historical records identify as the father of Chinese agriculture and the inventor of systematic farming, had already documented rice cultivation as the foundation of civilizational stability. His agricultural texts, preserved across centuries of transcription, describe rice not merely as food, but as infrastructure. The stored grain was the wall that protected the city even when no army could. When the harvest failed in 2600 BC, it was the buried rice that kept the population alive. When floods consumed the fields, it was the sealed vessels that fed the children. The Chinese did not stockpile rice because they were afraid. They did it because they had learned, through documented cycles of disaster, that the distance between survival and death was measured in pounds of stored grain. 2,000 miles west, the Egyptian civilization was arriving at the identical conclusion through an entirely separate catastrophe. The biblical account of Joseph and the Pharaoh is not mythology. It is one of the most well-documented ancient resource management strategies in the historical record. Egyptian grain storage facilities, called storehouses or granaries, built during what archaeologists date to roughly 1700 BC, have been physically excavated along the Nile Delta. They are enormous. The historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century AD, describes Egyptian granaries capable of holding reserves that could sustain the entire population for 7 years. Herodotus, the Greek historian writing in the 5th century BC, visits Egypt and writes in detail about the sophistication of their stored grain systems, noting that grain stored in the correct conditions remained edible for extraordinary lengths of time without spoilage. This was not folklore. This was engineering. The Egyptians understood, through centuries of empirical observation, that dry grain sealed from oxygen, moisture, and pests did not decay in any meaningful way. They built their entire civilization on that principle. In Mesoamerica, with no communication and no knowledge of China or Egypt, the Aztec civilization of the 14th and 15th centuries built something called the Calpixqui system. State-controlled granary networks spread across the empire, storing surplus maize and dried grain through a precisely administered rotation system managed by professional administrators. Spanish conquistadors arriving in the early 16th century documented Aztec granaries with visible shock, writing home about facilities they could not believe existed in a civilization they had arrogantly assumed was primitive. Hernán Cortés himself, in his letters to the Spanish crown, described the Aztec food storage infrastructure as more organized than anything he had witnessed in Europe. 3 civilizations, 3 separate continents, 0 contact between them. All independently arriving at the same survival mechanism, built on the same ingredient, stored through the same dry oxygen-free method. That is not coincidence. That is fundamental food science waiting to be understood. Stay with me, because what a FEMA researcher documents in 1988 changes everything we thought we knew about the modern legal landscape around doing exactly what these civilizations did. In 1988, a food scientist named Dr. Marie Rasmussen, working at Utah State University's Department of Nutrition and Food Sciences, was not trying to make history. She was trying to settle an argument about Army ration shelf life. The U.S. Army had been storing white rice in military-issue metal containers as part of its long-duration field ration research, and the question on the table was simple: how long does it actually stay safe to eat? Dr. Rasmussen's team opened containers that had been sealed and stored under controlled conditions for 10, 15, and 20 years. The results were not what anyone in the room expected. The rice was not merely edible. In blind taste tests conducted with the team, the 20-year-old rice, stored in sealed containers with oxygen absorbers, was rated indistinguishable from freshly purchased rice by a majority of panelists. Brigham Young University subsequently replicated the study under independent conditions and published findings confirming that properly stored white rice maintained nutritional integrity for 25 to 30 years. NASA incorporated long-duration rice storage into its astronaut food research. The EPA referenced the findings in emergency preparedness publications. Purdue University's agricultural department published supporting research on moisture content and oxygen exclusion methodology. The science stacked up with remarkable consistency across every institution that tested it. And then something very strange and quiet happened. Almost nothing changed. The $14 billion food storage industry continued selling you proprietary sealed buckets, branded oxygen absorbers, and specially packaged emergency kits, all built around an ingredient available for $2 at any grocery store, packaged using a method your great-grandmother already knew. This video is just the surface of what was buried. In the complete Forbidden Camping Vault, I have assembled everything the food storage industry does not want inside one document. The pre-industrial grain preservation methods that frontier families used across 2 centuries of American homesteading, which modern food storage companies now sell back to you as proprietary systems. The specific state statutes, zoning codes, and municipal storage ordinances in all 27 states, where residential food stockpiling enters legally complicated territory, and what the language actually says when you read it. The full shelf life comparison between commercial food storage products and their $2 hardware store equivalents, with documented performance data. Emergency calorie calculations by household size that no food storage brand will publish because the numbers reveal how little you actually need to buy. And the one overlooked preservation variable that doubles storage life at zero additional cost. The link is in the description. But stay right here, because the science I am about to show you is even more devastating than the history. Now let us examine what is actually happening at the molecular level when rice is properly stored, because the science behind this is not tradition or folk wisdom. It is peer-reviewed, independently replicated food chemistry that any agricultural university laboratory can verify and has verified repeatedly. The fundamental enemy of stored grain is not time. Time is largely irrelevant inside a sealed container. The 3 actual enemies are moisture, oxygen, and pest intrusion. Eliminate all 3, and the grain does not know what year it is. Think of it this way. A loaf of bread sitting on your counter is being attacked from 3 directions simultaneously. Airborne mold spores land on the surface and begin consuming it. Oxygen in the air triggers lipid oxidation in the flour, turning fats rancid. Ambient humidity provides the moisture that bacteria and fungi need to establish colonies. Now imagine you could build an invisible wall between that bread and all 3 of those attackers at once. Not slow them down, stop them entirely. That invisible wall is what a properly sealed container with an oxygen absorber creates around stored rice. White rice, unlike brown rice, has had its outer bran layer removed during milling. That bran layer contains the oils that go rancid. Without those oils, white rice has almost nothing for oxidation to attack. The starch granules inside are chemically stable, nutritionally complete, and structurally inert in the absence of moisture. This is why brown rice stores for only 6 to 12 months, while white rice, stored correctly, lasts decades. The mechanism is not complicated. It is elegant. An oxygen absorber, which is a small packet containing iron powder, consumes all available oxygen inside a sealed container through a simple oxidation reaction. The iron rusts. Within 72 hours of sealing, oxygen levels inside the container drop from the atmospheric 21% down to below 0.1%. At that oxygen level, no aerobic organism, no mold, no bacteria, no insect egg can survive or hatch. The grain enters a state of chemical suspended animation. It does not age in any meaningful biological sense. A sealed 5-gallon bucket of white rice, properly prepared, costs between $12 and $18 in total materials. The rice, the bucket, the lid, and the oxygen absorbers. Let me say that one more time so the numbers burn into your memory. $12 to $18. The commercial equivalent, a branded emergency food bucket marketed as a 30-day supply for one person, retails between $60 and $120 per unit at every major outdoor and preparedness retailer. For a family of 4, a 6-month supply purchased through commercial channels costs between $1,400 and $3,000, depending on the brand. The same caloric equivalent in properly stored bulk white rice costs under $200. Let me say that one more time so the numbers burn into your memory. $200 versus $3,000 for measurably identical caloric content and scientifically equivalent shelf life. The documented peer-reviewed science does not differentiate between a $2 bag of rice in a hardware store bucket and a proprietary branded emergency food system. The chemistry is identical. The survival outcome is identical. The only difference is the label and the price. And here is the part that should genuinely make you angry. The global emergency food storage market is currently valued at over $9 billion and growing at roughly 8% annually, according to market research published by Grandview Research in 2023. The consumer-facing portion of that market, the buckets, the kits, the freeze-dried meal systems, the branded preparedness packages, is dominated by a handful of companies. Augusten Farms, a company owned by Walmart subsidiary operations. Mountain House, distributed by Oregon Freeze Dry. ReadyWise, one of the fastest growing emergency food brands in the United States. Legacy Food Storage, which markets directly to the preparedness community through channels including YouTube. These are not small operations. They are multi-hundred-million-dollar businesses built on the industrialization of a survival practice that every civilization on Earth mastered for free. You cannot patent white rice. You cannot own the chemistry of oxygen exclusion. You cannot copyright the design of a sealed bucket. And what you cannot control, you rebrand, you mark up, and you bury the original method under enough marketing language that most people forget it ever existed. In 2011, the Federal Emergency Management Agency quietly revised its public preparedness guidelines to emphasize prepackaged commercial emergency food systems alongside, and in many cases instead of, the traditional bulk grain storage methods it had previously recommended. The revision was not announced. It was not debated. It simply appeared in the updated documentation. The commercial emergency food industry had spent years building relationships with federal preparedness infrastructure. Read that again. The agency responsible for telling Americans how to survive a disaster revised its guidance in a direction that happened to align with the commercial interests of a $9 billion industry, without public comment, without a press release, and without ever publishing a scientific justification for why a sealed bucket of branded rice outperforms a sealed bucket of grocery store rice. Because there is no scientific justification. The chemistry is the same. The outcome is the same. The only variable that changed was who profited. If you have made it this far, you already know more about food storage than 99% of people on Earth. Subscribe and share this with someone who deserves to know it. Now, I need to be honest, because credibility matters more than hype. There is one real limitation to bulk white rice storage that I will not hide from you. Rice alone is not a nutritionally complete diet. It provides calories, carbohydrates, and a modest amount of protein, but it lacks sufficient fat, vitamin C, and certain essential amino acids for long-term exclusive consumption. If you store only rice, you will eventually develop nutritional deficiencies. This is a documented medical reality. But here is the thing. This limitation does not reduce rice's value as the foundation of an emergency food system. It simply means rice is one component, not the entire plan. Pair it with stored legumes, which provide the complementary amino acids, and a basic multivitamin supply, and the limitation disappears entirely. Your great-grandmother did not live on rice alone. She stored rice alongside dried beans, salt, sugar, and cooking fat, the same combination that sustained frontier families through every winter, every drought, and every economic collapse for 200 years of American history. That is exactly how your grandparents used it. Here is exactly what to do this week. Go to any hardware store and buy 5-gallon food-grade HDPE buckets with Gamma Seal lids. The bucket costs between $4 and $6. The Gamma Seal lid, which allows you to open and reseal the container without tools, costs between $8 and $12. You can find both at Home Depot, Lowe's, Menards, or any farm supply store. Then go to any grocery store and buy 25-pound bags of long-grain white rice. Not brown rice, not jasmine or basmati, though those work as well. Standard long-grain white rice is the cheapest and stores the longest. A 25-pound bag currently runs between $12 and $18 at most grocery stores and discount retailers. Buy food-grade oxygen absorbers rated for 2,000 cc capacity. A pack of 20 costs between $8 and $12 on Amazon or at any preparedness retailer. The process takes less than 15 minutes per bucket. Pour the rice into the bucket, drop in 2 to 3 oxygen absorbers, press the Gamma Seal lid firmly until it clicks, and label the bucket with the date. Store in a cool, dry location away from direct sunlight. A basement, a closet, a garage that does not experience extreme heat. Do not store on concrete directly, as concrete can transmit moisture. A simple wooden pallet or shelf keeps the buckets elevated and protected. Total cost for a 1-month supply for a family of 4 using this method is approximately $30 to $45 in materials. A homeowner in Salt Lake City named David Harrington documented his family's 6-month supply project on a preparedness forum in 2019. He stored 12 5-gallon buckets of white rice and 8 buckets of dried pinto beans, sealed with oxygen absorbers, in his basement. Total material cost, $212. After 4 years, he opened 2 test buckets as part of his rotation schedule. The rice cooked normally, tasted clean, and showed 0 signs of moisture intrusion, pest presence, or nutritional degradation. $212. 4-year shelf life verified. Family of 4, covered. Now about those 27 states. The legal picture is real, but nuanced. Most state-level restrictions on residential food storage are tied not to the act of storing food itself, but to zoning classifications that affect how much can be stored in a residential versus agricultural designation, fire code requirements around certain storage configurations, and, in a small number of municipalities, emergency management ordinances written broadly enough to technically encompass large private stockpiles. None of these laws prohibit you from storing rice in sealed buckets in your home. What they do prohibit, in certain jurisdictions, is commercial-scale storage in residentially zoned properties and specific configurations that create fire or structural hazards. The distinction matters. Know the ordinances in your specific municipality, read the actual language. Because the people who benefit most from your confusion about what is and is not legal are the same companies selling you a $60 bucket of branded rice to replace the $18 bucket you could have built yourself. Your great-grandmother knew this. She knew it without a YouTube channel, without a preparedness industry, and without a branded solution. She knew it because her mother taught her, and her mother's mother taught her, and the knowledge went back further than any of us can trace through living memory. Now so do you. The next vault opens soon. What is inside weighs even heavier.